like you mentioned, I've been working in the app modernization space now for several years, helping really VMware customers with their journey from some monolithic systems that sit in the deepest, darkest corners of data centers through to helping thinking about taking large portfolios of applications on a hybrid cloud, multi-cloud modernization journey. And so I'm going to tell you some of the methods and some of the tools and techniques that we've developed to help our customers go on this journey. And I think will be really valuable for some of you, especially anyone who's got software that's older than 3-4 years old. You're going to be looking to modernize to better leverage the latest and greatest cloud technologies. And you need a way to explain this to your colleagues and counterparts. So that's the focus of today's talk. So starting off with, this is a favorite cartoon of ours, and if you've seen myself or my colleagues present, you probably have came across this one before, but this really well encapsulates the typical enterprise journey to cloud, right? You've got legacy software that's a massive beast in the organization. You've got cloud architects that are trying to figure out how this can fit into a completely different paradigm. You've got the legacy sysadmin still dealing with all of the challenges that the application faces with, using all of your storage on-prem or constantly falling over because it's getting too much traffic. And then, you've only got a handful of people who are the now senior developers that understand what this software actually does, and they were here when it was originally written. And so things that we often hear are, challenges like we need to get 200 applications running in production on the cloud in the next few months, or I'd like to get a work stream per business unit set up so that we can have all 25 business units working on cloud all at the same time. Oh, and by the way, we've never done this before, but we need this to happen right now. Or another common one of, hey, I've got 4,500 applications. They need to all go on a cloud journey because we want to shut down our data center. But I don't have an idea of where to get started or how to get started. It could also be the monolith case where we've got a massive piece of very important software that's just struggling to meet the performance needs of the organization. Great examples in some of the videos that we saw in the break around the need for adapting to the current market situation. If we look at COVID, there had to be a massive change in business models for many organizations, and how quickly could they adapt their software was the real test of whether or not they were going to be successful in their marketplace. And finally, I hear more than often of, we started modernizing and maybe we got a bit distracted, and it's taken us, we've done this much work in the last year, and we say, well, what's in production? And often we hear back, well, nothing's in production yet, but we're testing out Kubernetes, or we're testing out this new AWS service. And until the software's in production, I firmly believe that you haven't delivered any value to your users. So with that in mind, often the first thing that we do when we've been tasked with move 5,000 applications to cloud in the next 12 months is people will go and say, well, what's available? What's out there? And we get all of the best architects together who will start going, yeah, we really could use a service mesh. Or wouldn't it be great if we hosted our own Kubernetes? Oh no, maybe we should use an AWS one. Let's do a proof of concept to see the difference between a hosted version and a one that we run ourselves. Oh, and do we need to look at how we do compatibility between certain API gateways and existing infrastructure we have on-prem? And often this looks something like this. Your architects start going crazy after about 6 months of running around in circles, figuring out how to plug all this technology together. And then we say, oh, we forgot about the applications. So we go off and do an analysis phase, and someone wants a report that explains every single application that you've got and tells you exactly what's going to happen with it, and exactly how within 2 years all of those are going to move, and in what order they're going to move, and you get this massive roadmap, and that's kind of like 6 months later. So you're now 12 months down the line, you've made no progress against your original goal, and then you have a plan, and then your management team come along and say, yeah, give me that in a Gantt chart, please. Give me that in a timeline, commit to that. I'm going to take that to my leadership team and tell them that this is all going to be done in 2 years' time, and we'll all be on the cloud, and that's going to be great. And in reality, we know that that's not likely to get the outcomes the business is looking for. And also from a technology standpoint, there's so much unknown with app modernization. Like I mentioned, the developers have probably left the organization. You might have poor documentation. Maybe you're using third-party software in combination. And then if you look at the infrastructure it's running on is complex. And this is no easy task. And if you do it this way, you're setting yourself up to fail. And I love this Twitter thread from Gianna Basto, who's a product leader, CEO at ProductPad, and she's got a great thread. Recommend reading the whole thing. I've just taken my favorite tweets from this. And she says that most roadmaps are setting their product teams up to fail because most roadmaps still follow this timeline format. And maybe you're saying, hey, my agile team doesn't do that. We work agile, we work in sprints, or we do iterations. But when we come to looking at application modernization, and especially larger cloud migration programs or cloud modernization programs, what we still see is they still use this timeline format more often than not. This looks something like this, right? Where you have due dates and duration, you have all the tasks in the timeline, and you can imagine this is filled up with the different applications. You might have your corporate website, you might have your HR systems, and everything we plotted out, and it will say exactly what's going to happen. What this means is like Jana calls out, is there's a whole lot of assumptions in this timeline that you're committing to. You haven't actually tested this out. This is all paper-based theory. You know, it looks good in the boxes and lines diagram, but you haven't actually put this to the test. And then also it means that you're committing to something that's hard to change. And just like the agile mindset, right? Like we might not want to modernize an application that we said we did 6 months ago, because maybe something's changed. Maybe there's a more important area of the business that needs to have faster time to market, or we've seen that there's a new regulation that came in that means we need to patch and keep secure certain parts of our application estate in a different way than we did before. And so if we're committing to a timeline-based roadmap, that means that we can't really adapt it easily, and it causes a lot of friction with the expectations you've set in the organization. So we want a way that allows us to change the plans and adjust our modernization priorities back to what the business is demanding and ultimately what your customers are demanding. So how do we do this, right? And going back to the premise of this talk, right, we think about executable strategic roadmaps, and the first point being executable. Well, what do I mean by executable? Well, think of it this way. You can get started immediately and make progress. So what we want to see is that as a development team or as a team of teams, that you can pick up this roadmap and you can look at it and understand, okay, I have a way of getting started. I understand what I'm going to be doing. I've got some repeatable patterns that I can apply here. I know the landing zone potentially of where the application is going to go, and we can start making progress from day one. We want them to be strategic because it needs to align to the business priorities and strategies. And we need it in a roadmap so we can communicate our direction, focus, and the why. So we can tell this great story of we're going to modernize these applications because it helps us deliver better customer outcomes through more frequent releases to production. It's going to increase stability for these key customer types. And our developers can then also understand, well, how do I get started with this, right? Like I have all the things I need to get going and actually start changing the application or doing the work to it to modernize it. Okay, so if we agree that this is a good way to go, well, we can't have a roadmap that has an answer for all 500 applications in your portfolio. We need to prioritize. And the way that we like to think about prioritizing is creating a decisioning model. So you can take all the applications and pour it into this model. And what it should start to give you at the end of this is a prioritization. And it will tell you these applications are worth spending more time on, right? Based on some factors, which I'll talk through in a sec, you'll see that certain applications are going to be more interesting for us to spend time on and will give us a better chance of impacting against the mission. So this often falls into two buckets. We often see there's a technical feasibility. So based on the application, how much of a fit is it for modernization and how much effort will that be? Is it a mainframe application and no one in the organization knows anything about it? That's going to be very hard versus an application that's maybe a piece of Java software that was built in the last 10 years, right? That's often easier to get started on a modernization journey. Then when you think about business value, you're going to be looking at things like time to market, or is it going to impact the ability to deliver some new functionality to customers, or change the way that you operate the software that saves you money. And so a couple of examples here, both on technical feasibility, we might look at, I'm going to show you this way of analyzing application source code in a minute. Then we might look at resiliency, we might look at dependencies the software has, and then from the business side, the strategic value, maybe the delivery velocity. But what you want to do is build a model that's right for your organization, right? So when you're looking at what's important from a technology perspective, you put those factors in, and that might be different to these, right? It might be to do with like scalability, cost saving, license costs, and same from the business value. You need to map this back onto your organization. But these are just some things to get you thinking and get started. And at the end of this, what we want to be able to do is put this into a strategic modernization prioritization chart. This is going to help guide us where to put our focus. I'm going to show you an example of this in the talk as well. Okay, so the first step we think of is building this scoring algorithm and putting some weightings to it. And so to actually implement the model in a more scientific way, we've developed a lightweight way of classifying and putting value to those different attributes. So we might say in this simple example, we're going to put 50% of the weighting towards the business score, and we'll put 50% of the weighting towards the technology score. Within the business score for strategic value, we're going to look at things like, is the app used by customers? Is it tied to addressing a compliance or security issue? We might look at delivery velocity, which would include how many developers are dedicated to maintaining the app, how many times you've released features in the last year. And these are all indicators whether it's got a healthy delivery velocity. And we'll also be able to prioritize on what do we want in the future? Like, does this application need to go faster? And you can put this into this model. On the technology side, you might weight this towards resiliency, which would have like, does this impact our ability to meet a customer service level agreement? Or dependency, like do lots of other applications depend on this application? And if we could turn it into an application that say provides APIs, for example, would that mean that that whole ecosystem gets much more benefit from the application? So again, customize this, assign a weight, become a bit more scientific is my advice. This helps you explain why you've made decisions. I see organizations often fall into the trap of picking their favorite application and getting stuck on that. So avoid this, get a bit more scientific. You can model this on a whole business, on a business unit basis, on a product basis, but it really helps you come back to explain your decisions. And as you'll see later, you can adjust this model based on your new priorities and reorder your roadmap. So again, I'll show you an example of that later in the talk. So one thing I did want to introduce, I don't normally like to talk about tools too much, but as this is a developer track, I think this might be quite fun for some of you. So at VMware, we've developed a tool called Cloud Suitability Analyzer. We've just open sourced it recently, so you can try this in your organization. It picks out something like 1,900 anti-patterns for modernization. And so what this does is it runs against the source code of your applications, and it tells you things around how hard it might be to move this into a cloud-friendly environment, or how container-friendly or container-ready this application is. And it gives you insights into the portfolio. It tells you what the main APIs, languages are used, and other things. And this effectively helps you make accelerated decisions. And also, going back to the executable point, as you'll see in a second, it shows the developers line by line which lines of code are going to cause them problems, or which libraries are causing them issues. And this will start to tell them if there's out support Java, file system dependencies, legacy frameworks. And it's super accelerates that first pass of technical analysis and allows you then to go and have smarter conversations with the application teams that own those apps. And so this is available on GitHub, VMware Tanzu Cloud Suitability Analyzer. So go check it out, give it a try. But how do you run this, right? It's quite straightforward. It's a command line based application. And so it's all self-contained, runs 100% offline, which is great if you're running in an air-gapped environment, or you don't want to expose your source code to kind of outside interference, let's say. So you download this one, put all of your source code in a folder, and then you can run Cloud Suitability Analyzer over this. What that generates is allows you to bring up this nice UI, and you can start to explore the different applications. You can see how many high priority issues there are. You can see the line of code that's causing the issue, and you can start to then understand what we would call recipes. So you might have a common solution, so that when engineers in your team come across this problem in the future, let's say when they're going and containerizing their application or putting it on Kubernetes, then they can follow the recipe or follow an automated tool that fixes that issue. It's also customizable for your apps, so that we know that not every application, you might use different technologies, right? You might have PHP applications, you might use Node.js, you might use .NET. So you can actually extend the tool and write your own rules. So an example here is a Java-based rule that's going to look for a certain pattern in the application source code, and then it's going to give you the advice of what to do. And so you can write your own rules and start to extend the tool. You can also write your own models for scoring. And so you'll have noticed on here, you'll see that each application is given a score. We've got a scoring algorithm that we've made that's kind of the default one. You can also start to build your own scoring algorithm that would imply the technical complexity or technical feasibility of doing something with this application in terms of modernization. Great. So going back to our scoring algorithm, like we've maybe went off and talked to some of our business stakeholders, we've talked to the product owners, and they've came back to us with some information about the application, right? Like they've answered our question, and we'll be able to assign points based on certain factors. So again, on the point scoring, you might have a graduated scale that you might apply to the points, right? You might go high, medium, and low, and maybe medium is 20 points, 30 points, etc. And you can assign that to the applications. So you apply the scoring, and so this is telling us here that the application isn't used directly by customers, but it is very critical for compliance for compliance use cases. Then on the technical side, we've seen that the Cloud Suitability Analyzer score has told us it's very low effort. So that means it's in a good condition. It'd be quite easy to get it running in a more modern environment. And maybe also it's easier to make changes to the application. And then maybe we've done some research by talking to teams or looking at your observability stack, and have seen that actually this application mostly meets its SLAs, but there's been a lot of production issues, and maybe there's an opportunity to improve resiliency in the application. So putting this all together is interesting because it gives us two different perspectives to look at. And then when you put this combined score based on, say, a 50-50 weighting of this, what it's telling us is this application's got a 48, right? And what you can then start to do is compare this against other applications. So the higher the score, the more the opportunity that we have here. And so when you put this together, we often find that refer to this as looking for the golden nuggets in the portfolio. So this is a 2x2 here, and this is a super easy way to start classifying the application. So on this axis, we've got the technical feasibility. So that's like, is it very feasible? Is it very simple? And is there a high business value, right? So is the business value low, or is the business value high, or business value low? And so when we start to plot these into a chart, what you can see is that there's a group of applications here that's high value and highly feasible. And this is in this section. And then you've got some that are high value but low feasibility. So these are maybe the ones that your customers really care about, but it's going to be really, really hard to change the technology. And then over here, we've got ones that are low value, but very technically feasible. So maybe this is where you might not want to invest too much in them, but hey, if you could get them running on a more modern platform, that might save you a lot of time, a lot of money in terms of the operational tasks that you might do. It might make it simpler for your developers, so you get more highly productive developers. And taking a cross section of these applications will allow you to start to focus in on where there might be value for the organization. Okay, so the next concept of, once you've started to look at which applications are the ones that are likely to be high value and highly feasible and give you a good chance of having an impact against your objectives, you might want to start thinking about building archetypes. And this is an interesting concept of categorizing applications based on similar patterns and similar constructs. And so in this example, what you can see are these different clusters of similar applications based on certain criteria. So we might understand what the footprint of a pattern is within the portfolio. So we might see that, hey, there's quite a lot of applications that are Java applications that have single sign-on capabilities. Right, and that might be interesting for us. Or we might say that we have lots of finance applications that are all batch, and we can start to give them this characteristics. And so what we can then think about is, if we solve a pattern for one of these applications, what's the knock-on effect of that so to speak. So if we solve it for this application, does it mean we solve it for all of these? And you can think of that as an accelerator. So you've solved it once based on a pattern, and then you can estimate the impact that's going to have. And you can then start to think about, well, is this a good investment, right? Like, it's going to take us a fair amount of time to make this one change, but once we've solved it, we know that it's applicable to 30% of our portfolio. And so that's what we think of as these accelerators, and doing it in a smart way rather than just a timeline where you commit to everything. And just a couple of examples here of what these might look like, right? You might group them by technology type. You might group them also, like I mentioned, by line of business type. It really depends on what's going to be meaningful for your teams and organization. Okay, so next question we often get asked is, great, well, we know the applications that are valuable, we know the ones that are feasible, we've got an idea of where we could start to create patterns from based on those archetypes. But where does this go? Like, where do the developers actually land the application based on what criteria? And we find that if you don't give the team the guardrails, we can go back to that picture we've seen at the start of everyone looking at the CNCF catalog and kind of going crazy. So we believe in giving the developers and the teams that will be doing the modernization guidance on what we call landing zones. Okay, so we've put the application portfolio through the decisioning model. We then might start to say that based on the application's technical feasibility, based on some technical characteristics like, this application is already containerized, right? This application is off-the-shelf software, or this application has more stateful, complex things. We might start to look at a solution like a container API landing zone. And then we can think, well, what do these applications need if they're running on this container API? Well, maybe they need API gateways, maybe they need logging metrics, single sign-on. And we can start to build the right platform that's going to meet the needs of the applications that we're going to prioritize. You might start to look at more adventurous refactoring for some applications. So this is often the applications that need a higher rate of change, or we need to get them in a place where, when the product team decide that we need to rapidly change how the product works, that these applications can react a lot quicker. This might be new applications, it might be 12-factor applications, Spring applications, more modern .NET Core applications, and these might run on an applications API. So this might be kind of like, think of Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, it might be more of a serverless type platform, could also be a platform like Cloud Foundry, kind of any platform as a service could be a good landing zone for reducing the amount of time developers need to think about infrastructure. But for some applications, they don't change very often, or maybe they have some real complex dependencies on the infrastructure, or we need to keep them very close to the native landing zone. Maybe we'll just rehost those applications, right? And this is the kind of UMS for maybe less, or move it from A to B, not fundamentally changing things, but this could help us with reducing costs, making smarter use of our infrastructure footprint, and is an option that we should all consider. So having a model like this, customize it for your teams, give them some guidance on the landing zone based on what they're trying to achieve. And then think about whether it's worth investing in refactoring, how much effort it is to move it onto a new abstraction level like Kubernetes, or whether or not it's not really worth investing in too much. Finally, we put this together into a executable strategic roadmap. What we see here is this is the grand plan. So this is the alternative to a timeline-based roadmap. So on the top, you can see kind of the outcomes we're trying to drive towards, which is the first phase. We're thinking, let's create the recipes, create the patterns. We'll take a cross-section of different teams. We'll take a section of different recommended landing zones. So, hey, we're going to do some where we're going to re-platform, some where we refactor. And after we've done this, we'll be able to execute much quicker on the next round of applications. So then we might tackle the high priority and highly technical feasible applications. Then we might scale to more complex apps. And by the end of this, maybe customers get features 10 times faster on the most used applications, right? Which might be the big objective we're trying to achieve as a company. But what's important here, and what we need to communicate to our stakeholders, is that if you look at what we're saying down here, which is higher certainty will be earlier on in the roadmap, right? So we're quite certain that these applications are the ones to start with. Then we think if these applications, if we get the results we expected, potentially this application group is good to go next. But this might change, and you might want to come back to your decision model and rethink the priorities based on what you learn from the modernizations you do, right? Like we expected by doing XYZ changes that super API was going to be 10 times faster, but actually it's only 5 times faster. So does that affect our calculations? Do we need to change our model or change our assessment methodology? And that might mean the roadmap changes. But that's not a bad thing. And that's the whole purpose of executable strategic roadmaps, is that you can get started quickly, you can map this back to your priorities, and you can communicate what you're doing, why you're doing it to your stakeholders. So I think that's all I had to show you. We will be launching some tools to make this a bit easier for you. We're going to be hopefully putting this into a blog around a canvas that you can start to use, like the business model canvas. But yeah, it's been a pleasure sharing with you today, and I think we might have some time for Q&A, but also Twitter, LinkedIn, great for follow-ups with me. Happy to engage and discuss more with you.